Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about deleting code, and unfortunately I forgot to delete any letters from the second word of this talk's title. Oh, no, okay, that's changed. So this basically comes from a story of some things I've been doing recently. And of course, the best way to start a story is with a question. Are you sitting comfortably? So what is my story? Well, at the start of this year, I found myself working with a big old code base where lots of the people who had worked on this big old code base weren't around anymore. And lots of the people who were around didn't know how the big old code base worked, and we had to understand it. So yeah, as I was reading through this code base, I kept reading through bits of code that weren't used anymore. And I was wasting time trying to understand this code. So as I discovered it, I would periodically remove bits of code. Things like string eval, we've got dynamic method dispatch. It's not a static language where you can promise and guarantee that your code definitely isn't being used. So I started by going fairly carefully, mostly removing bits from our test libraries that none of our tests call, because hey, what can go wrong there? And then after a while, I got a bit more bold and started removing bits of code. And then after a while, I realized, well, of the hundreds of thousands of lines of code in this repository, I've really not deleted that much. And I thought, this is the stuff I've discovered, there must be even more I can delete, or possibly delete, or probably delete. And hey, we've got testers, and if I break production, we can roll back, so it's fine. So I stuck, and actually I hadn't broken production at the time with any of this randomly deleting code. So I thought, well, I'll try and automate it. Also, this isn't something I'm supposed to be doing. What I'm supposed to be doing is developing new features, doing my everyday work. But the more I delete code, the quicker I can delete features. And people weren't telling me off for deleting code. And some of my colleagues were going, is that still there? I thought we deleted that 5 years ago. So basically, I was looking, every time I found some code that seemed dodgy, there's an E on the end now. This is going to be fun. Yeah, so basically, I was grepping the code base to try and find things that weren't being used and deleting them. That's how I started out. I like to use a tool called TIG because I found it a really useful way of exploring repositories. But any tool you use to explore the repository beyond git grep can be really helpful. After a while, I started, this is basically my first pass at automating it. I looked for lines that started with the word sub, and I found everything on clib. So this basically gives me all of the methods that are in my test libraries, like that. And basically cut, I could have used awk or Perl, but this was like, it was about 5:30 and I wanted to go home, but I thought I'll just give this a go, see what happens. Put it all in a variable. And then and what I'm doing here, again, yeah, my slides have cut off on the end, but basically we're going through the code base and finding all of the uses of each method. And if there's only one use of this method in my code base, I know that the subroutine's been declared but never been called. So, well, if we've got subroutines that are declared but never called, they can go. So I deleted a few of these things. And I put this in the commit message as well in case anyone else wanted to do it. And people are like, hey, that's quite cool. I forget how much code I deleted with that. But there were some problems with this because some of my colleagues document their code and they write comments. And this documentation and comments contains the method names, so therefore it occurs more than once. So really what I need to do, I've deleted all the undocumented unused code, but not the documented unused code. So I figured that I could go through everything in the T directory that was a test or a test library and use Perl tidy to strip out the pod, strip out the comments, just whack it in this. I could put all that code in this directory. UUID-gen just gives me a random file name. I don't actually care what it's called. But what I've got now is this directory called clean, which has all the clean code with no pod and no docs. And so I can come back to this thing again. And instead of using git grep, I now do a recursive grep on my cleans directory. The grep $1 finds things that are only used once. And I found a whole load more code that was never being called in the test directory. So I could delete that as well, and that was a few thousand lines more, and I put the shell script in the git commit message so people could do that. Are you scared? Well, I've also gone on to do a bit of this on our code base under lib, not under the test directory. Some of that's in production, some of it will go out in the next release. If you were a responsible person, which I'm not, you could find potentially unused methods and put a log in, then go back a few months later, check through your logs. If you never see this in the log, then you never called it, so you can delete it. So, but really my conclusion is if you're working with old code, don't be afraid of deleting it. Perhaps talk to people a bit, be a bit more responsible. This is a lightning talk. And so ultimately my conclusion is, oh, I deleted the conclusion.